Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host tonight, Matt Filipovitz, joined by my phenomenal co-host, Mr. Bill DeFilippo. Bill, how are you enjoying your first of two bye weeks this fall?
I mean, so far it doesn't feel unlike anything normally. I'm spending this week waking up when I always do and doing what I do just about every day. The difference is going to come on Saturday when I wake up and there's just no Penn State game for me to watch.
You don't have this this feeling that oh my God, they looked awful last time we saw them. I want to see them again so I can relieve some of my worries. Are you in the same boat as me where it's like his team probably needs a week away from the spotlight?
I mean, it's not even that. I I just have faith that the next time this team goes out on the field, in large part because Kent State is bad,
That might be the worst
actively
team in
bad.
FBS.
Yeah, they're on the list of the worst teams in FBS, and I just know that one of two things is going to happen the next time out. Either the next time out, Penn State is going to stomp them, and all the feelings of God, I just need to see them. I need to see this. I need to see that are going to go away, or they're going to look terrible. And if they look terrible against Kent State after a week off, after having a game where they look terrible against Bowling Green, that is going to be very almost certainly it's going to be very instructive for how good or bad this team is.
Yeah, I think if they struggle against Kent State next week, which we'll talk about next week, that's not the point in today's podcast. I think we are in for a much longer fall than we anticipated. But if you're here, first of all, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to hit like if you're watching on YouTube, jump in the comments. If you're listening on podcast, 5 stars, all nice things. We're very excited to be here. And Bill, today is our mailbag episode, and I'm very excited to open up the mailbag here in a little bit. We got a ton of great questions from our listeners out there on Twitter. But to start things off, Bill, there is one piece of news in the Penn State football sphere I think it's important for us to hit on, and that is yesterday at his post-practice press conference. Try saying that 3 times fast. James Franklin more or less confirmed Andrew Rappleyea will be out for an extended period of time. I'm assuming that means he's out for the season by nature of when this injury occurred. Rappleyea, a redshirt freshman, a guy who was such a big part of that offense in week 1 against West Virginia. I just feel really bad for this poor kid. This is a kid who was in high school for 4 years, plus a year at a prep school where he focused on becoming a better blocker so he could become a more complete tight end. He then had to sit on the bench on the sideline while Penn State had its, 3-headed tight end monster last year. He gets his opportunity this year, and now it's cut short. So, Bill, just your initial thoughts on losing redshirt freshman tight end Andrew Rappleyea for the season.
Yeah, I when you separate it from Penn State's roster, and you're going to ask about that in a second, so I'll save that for them. But you feel for the kid above everything else.
Mm-hmm.
He's the good news, relatively speaking, is that there's a lot of football ahead for him. God forbid this turns into a thing where his knee just doesn't hold up, which, I'm hopeful, praying, whatever, that doesn't happen. But you feel for the kid. You wanted to see what he could do this year. They were high on him, but he gets back to 100%, however long that ends up taking. He's someone who, again, has a lot of football ahead of him. Another year of collegiate eligibility. If he wants to after next season and he's able to show that he's able to do that, he can go to the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But even if he needs next year to kind of get his bearings about, in the event he's out all season, which we don't know, but even in the event that he misses this season, has to come back next year, even if he uses next year as a season to kind of get his footing back, he still has another potentially 2 years of college football to go, 3 years of college football to go. So I'm not long term, I'm not worried about Andrew Rappleyea. I'm sure he's going to come back bigger and stronger and better than ever. But for the kid, it sucks. You want to see him play as much football as possible. You want to see him play as much impactful football as possible. And that's been taken away from him.
And for what it means in the short term for Penn State's tight end room in 2024, obviously Tyler Warren is the lead dog in that pack. That was always going to be the case no matter how well Andrew Rappleyea performed this year. I don't think that's controversial to say. But now it creates a little bit of a competition for who gets those next reps. Luke Reynolds got the start. Penn State started in 12 personnel last week against Bowling Green. So Luke Reynolds, 5-star tight end up in New England in Connecticut. He became the first true freshman to start for Penn State since 2022 this past Saturday. I don't think that would have been the case should Khalil Dinkins had been fully healthy. Dinkins did get in the game and record a catch to move the sticks on 4th down, which right off the bat you love to see. But Bill, in the short term, do you think this is going to have a massive impact on the Penn State offense, or are you with me in that it's going to hurt depth? It's probably going to change how they handle a couple of things, but if the reason they win, 9 games instead of 10 this year, it's not going to be because Andrew Rappleyea is out for the year.
Yeah, it's tough. I think at any position, if you lose the starter, it's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're Penn State and, God forbid you lose one of your 2 running backs, then having even if you have Nick Singleton or Katron Allen there, like, it's a problem to lose the guy at the very top of your depth chart. That's just sports 101.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the rest of the tight end room, honestly, obviously Andrew Rappleyea is someone they thought could be a good football player this year, someone who could help them win football games this season. I don't know. I'm not going to say they're going to win or lose a game because of this, because I frankly don't know. But the thing is, if there was a position on Penn State's roster that could afford to lose one of the guys who, one of the depth options,
mm-hmm.
even if it's a depth option who plays a ton of football, it would be tight end, because in the tight end room, Penn State has Khalil Dinkins, a guy who has played a lot of football, a guy who has been around forever, probably is the number 2 tight end in the tight end room, even if it's a 2 and 2A thing with Andrew Rappleyea. And then beyond them, it's Jerry Cross, a guy who's in his 3rd or 4th year at Penn State, whatever it is by this point, a former 4-star recruit. Joey Schlafer, a guy in his 2nd year at Penn State who was a 4-star recruit. And Luke Reynolds, true freshman, 4-star, very highly regarded 4-star recruit, who has already been able to get on the field a bit for the Nittany Lions this season. So
he has played in both games already, so I think it's beyond fair to say, hey, that dude's not going to redshirt.
Correct. So there's a lot. Again, on a personal level, it really stinks for Andrew Rappleyea. But if there's one position on Penn State's roster that could afford to lose a player who was going to have about as big of a role as we expected Andrew Rappleyea to have, it would have been their tight end room.
Yeah, it just sucks for the poor kid. Again, you never want to see a kid get hurt, especially this early on in the year. Wishing him a speedy recovery, and excited to see what those other guys are able to do. I'm really glad we get a couple weeks off for Khalil Dinkins to get up to speed health wise, and for the rest of those guys to be ready in case their number is called. But Bill, with no game for us to talk about this week, and really not all that much interesting in the world of college football going on, with a pretty light slate, we decided to open up the mailbag, and we do have a good amount of questions. So, Bill, here's the mail. It never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it comes, I want to wail. Mail. And let's get started with our first couple of questions. Sound good?
Sure.
I'll do 2 at once because these came in basically they cover the same topic. And I think we touched on this a little bit in our last episode. I think it's a good spot for us to, kick this off. So the first question comes from Will Gamble. What would you rather have? The 10-play ball control offense from last year that spreads the ball around to multiple players, or the offense from this year that is more explosive? And then Sylvester Owens also asks, thoughts on CJF's comments regarding lack of plays on O? Really worth sacrificing explosive plays to decrease plays on D? How do they balance ball control and explosiveness? So these we can kind of tie together and answer really, in one fell swoop. Bill, I would rather see the offense that Andy Kotelnicki wants to run, which is when the opportunity to take deep shots come, make sure you go out there and that you hit them. And thankfully for Penn State, a lot of the time, they're hitting them. But I think that they can do both. They can go out there and try to get all these explosive plays and also have a couple of long, sustained drives in a game. And I think that first drive against Bowling Green is the perfect example of that. You look at Penn State's scoring drives against Bowling Green, explosive plays left and right, whether that be the Amari Evans catch, whether that be Nick Singleton's touchdown, whether that be Tyler Warren ripping off big plays down the seam. That's how they scored a lot of their points. But that first drive was a sustained drive, which was capped off by like a 4-yard Drew Aller run on a read option. So in terms of what I think is best, I think it's Andy Kotelnicki's big play hunting. And with those big plays, doesn't have to be touchdowns. It can also be 15-yard gains that you can then use to keep the sticks moving, stay on target, and still get enough plays to where your defense can get a little bit of rest. Bill, where do you fall on this?
So I understand the questions. I just kind of reject the framing of it.
Okay.
And the reason I reject the framing of it is because if Penn State could have 5-play, 75-yard touchdown drives every single time out, I don't think James Franklin would turn that down. If Penn State could have a 3-play drive that gets them into field goal range and they kick a field goal, I don't necessarily think James Franklin would reject that. What I do think James Franklin rejects, and this is in large part because this has been a James Franklin thing from like the day he came to Penn State, is 1st and 10, we're looking for a chunk play. 2nd and 10, we're looking for a chunk play. Next thing you know, it's 3rd and 10. It's an obvious passing situation. The other team is going to do what they can to stop us from converting that 3rd down. They're going to drop, 8 into coverage, rush 3. There's going to be nowhere to throw. Drew has to throw it away. Punt team comes out. When we went through the numbers last week, or on our the most recent episode of the pod, where against Bowling Green, they went 2 for 9 on 3rd down and they averaged 8.5 yards to go. Like, that is what I think James Franklin more than anything is trying to avoid. He's trying to avoid situations where it becomes 3rd down. You go through the drive list. When it is a 3rd and 3 and a run gets stuffed, that is frustrating because of what happens on 3rd and 3. When it is a 3rd and 9 and Drew Aller has to drop back and throw, and there's nowhere for him to throw, that is frustrating because you failed on 1st and 2nd down. Then I decided to look at the numbers, and right now, Penn State is converting about 35% of its opportunities on 3rd down. We are early in the season, though, and that number will normalize as the year goes out. If they were to stay at 35%, though, that would have put them 99th nationally last year.
Not good enough.
That more than anything is what I think James Franklin is trying to avoid. And it is worth mentioning, last season, Kansas was 9th nationally at 49.33% on 3rd down conversions. So it's not like, Andy Kotelnicki, big play offense, yes. Doesn't run as many plays, doesn't run a ton of plays, yes. All that goes into it. But I think you can have the big play offense. You can have an offense that finds those big plays, that is able to punish defenses for this and this and this, and have an offense that is not putting itself in disadvantageous situations because on 1st down, you're looking for a huge chunk play. On 2nd down, when you didn't get that chunk play, you are looking for another chunk play. And then you're just so far behind the 8 ball on 3rd down that it, the likelihood of you converting in that situation is very, very low.
I think there's a second part to this question too, where it's a lot of concern for the number of snaps that this defense could potentially have to shoulder playing alongside an offense like this. And I totally get that concern, but Penn State didn't have a terrible first half last weekend because the Penn State defense was on the field too often. They just weren't gap sound. They were just undisciplined. So I do think that this is going to kind of even itself out as the Penn State defense settles into itself. Like, I fully expect them to be taking care of business against Kent State, Illinois, and UCLA. And in that, I think we're going to have a better idea of what the defense is going to have to shoulder in a less, just frankly, weird game state. So I think a lot of reps for the defense when they're healthy, which I think that they really aren't right now, with Timmy Robinson out, with KJ Winston out or dinged up at least. I do hope we see them, fairly soon, but it's not necessarily a bad thing for your defense to play a lot of snaps because that's how guys can break out. Like, I think Elliott Washington's a really good example of this. That's a guy who was probably like CB5 heading into the season. And I feel confident already that that guy can go out there and hold his own against the ones in the Big Ten, which is a great thing that we would not have learned had this defense have not played as many snaps. So as guys get healthy, when KJ Winston come back, when Tamir Robinson come back, when those guys are back in the fold, and Dakari Nelson's maybe a little bit more up to speed, I don't think this is going to be as big of a deal because you can split those reps up against players who are more ready and then surround them with these veteran guys who might be able to control a bit more while those guys get up to speed with game reps. Are you in the same mindset there? Okay.
Kinda. I mean, the fact that they are injured, the fact that they do have depth questions means that you want to keep your first team depth questions in the second and third levels of their defense, at court, at linebacker, and at safety, means you want your defense to not have to play as frequently as possible. And for a game like last week, where the defense was very obviously, it just didn't have its composure. It was chasing, it didn't look particularly composed. It was chasing ghosts. They looked like, they were taking a lot of body blows early in the game. Like the thing with a game against Bowling Green, with respect to Bowling Green, who again played really well at a great game plan, is you don't want your defense to spend a lot of time on the field until it is your twos, it is your threes, it is your walk-ons, it is your freshmen in one of the games where they can play without having to worry about burning their red shirt down there. That's when getting a lot of snaps isn't necessarily like a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The problem comes again when you go out there, the defense, even if it is a drive where, like the first drive, where it just looked like Bowling Green had them off their game. Obviously, the offense came out and they scored right after that. So it wasn't as big of a deal. But if the offense goes out and has a 3 and out and the defense has to go right back out there and they don't have the time to compose themselves, to look over the tape, to understand what they just went through, that's when it becomes a problem. So I get what you are saying,
Mm-hmm.
but I also think generally you want to be able to impose your will on both sides of the ball, just in general, but especially in a game against a G5 opponent. And the fact that they weren't doing that against the G5 opponent that they were playing on the defensive side of the ball in the first half meant the offense could have given them a bit of a hand,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more of a hand. And again, they scored 20 points in the first half. But when you have when Bowling Green goes 6 plays, 75 yards, touchdowns on their next drive, 10 plays, 60 yards, and a field goal, and your next drive is a 3 and out for -8 yards, the last thing you want is to put your defense back out there, because you might get a situation like what ended up happening, or you run the risk of getting a situation like what ended up happening, which is on that very next drive, Bowling Green 10 plays, 73 yards, 5 minutes and 43 seconds to go up by 2 scores. You can get away with that kind of stuff against Bowling Green. If that happens against Ohio State, they're going to lose that football game. So I understand where Franklin is coming from with all of that.
So I think to give a firm answer to this, it kind of depends a lot of the time, but I don't want how Andy Kotelnicki calls games to be changed based around concerns for the defense and the amount of reps that they show.
Yeah. I mean, if Andy Kotelnicki is going out there, or if Andy Kotelnicki, the James Franklin horror meddling situation that everyone thinks exists. If James Franklin is going up there and telling Andy Kotelnicki, all right, Andy, we need to just run the football on this drive. We need to make sure that we have a nice 10-play, 50-yard drive that takes 6 minutes, so the big fellows on the defense can put on those oxygen masks and catch their breath. And on that very first play, they hand the ball to Nick Singleton, and Nick Singleton just busts it for 50 yards for a touchdown. I don't think James Franklin would be particularly upset about that. It's just one of those things where everything is kind of connected. The offense has to help the defense has to help the offense, and more, it's less about the big plays you're making and more about the big plays that you are trying to make that end up hurting your team in a situation where, okay, maybe we didn't have to go searching for a big play right here, because we could have taken something a little bit easier to keep our offense off the field, keep our defense keep our offense on the field and keep our defense off of it.
If you can score points, score points.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's what it's going to come back to for us.
I think that's how, and I'm a little bit guilty of doing this as well. I think a lot of people took this as James Franklin going, yeah, we're scoring points, but I want us to score points more slowly. I don't necessarily think he meant that. I think what he meant was, I don't want us to be in positions where we are putting ourselves at a disadvantage on both sides of the football. Because, yeah, when those big plays hit, they are great. They can set up a lot of things. They can add some juice to the stadium, all that. When they don't hit, you are in a quicksand situation where suddenly you're getting pulled in, and you kind of got to keep trying to get out of it, and that can just make it worse.
Yeah. We'll stick with the offense for our next question, which comes from our very own Craig. First of all, hi, Craig. Thank you for listening. Promo code RLR24. Check out Craig. Craig's question is, what's your favorite Big Zamboni formation so far? Bill, do you want to change this up? Because I'll just tell Craig, hey, I changed your question later. Do you have a favorite play, or do you want to stick with formation so far for this team?
It's the same. The answer is the same to both, and is anything that involves putting
Vega Ioane in the slot,
and motioning him.
Right.
Yeah, and motioning him. Like whether it's a run play, whether it's a pass play, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, get more offensive linemen doing weird stuff, and I think we're going to have a great time. So I think that's both of our answers. Bill,
there we go.
Next question from Zach Kronrath. I apologize if I said your last name incorrectly.
You don't apologize to him for anything. He knows what he did.
All right, fair enough. Bill,
Zach, if you've ever heard me mention my friend who is a podcast listener around here, it is Zach.
Oh,
so
what's up, Zach?
Zach, I love you to death, and also I'm going to be lovingly mean to you on the podcast.
Zach asks, Bill, you can take this one first. If you could pick one former Penn State receiver from the Franklin era to add to this team, who would it be?
I think that's easy, and it's Jahan Dotson.
I knew you were going to say
because
Jahan.
Yeah, because Jahan Dotson is the best receiver that Penn State had in the James Franklin era. His versatility, his ability to line up on the outside or line up in the slot is something that I think would work really well with Trey Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Trey Wallace's explosiveness would lead to more opportunity. Trey Wallace's explosiveness, and this is kind of something that we saw last week, or I think will come up in our conversation about in a future question. When teams could just hyper focus on Trey Wallace, having someone that you could rely on to feed the football to makes his life a little bit easier. And I think that combination of Jahan Dotson's just ability to do anything and everything that you want out of a wide receiver, and Trey Wallace's ability to add that element of explosiveness in the passing game is something that like Penn State desperately needs. I mean, in 2020, Jahan Dotson caught 52 balls for 884 yards and 8 touchdowns.
In 9 games.
In 9 games. In 2022, their top receiver was Parker Washington, 46, 6'11", and 2. 2023, it was Keandre Lambert-Smith, 53, 673, and 4. So like they haven't had a guy they could just feed the football to in a minute, and he will make something happen with and without the ball. So it's Jahan Dotson. Like, you put this guy in this Penn State offense, and I think magic would happen. The other answer is obviously KJ Hamler, because KJ Hamler in this offense. Because KJ Hamler in this offense would be hilarious.
Two things on the KJ point. Number one is KJ value as a punt returner. I'm not saying Caden Saunders can't be a good punt returner, but the fumble last week did make me nervous. And like some of your parts, like that still counts for something that a wide receiver does. I think Andrew Kildonicki would be laughing his ass off trying to think about different ways he can get KJ Hamler involved in this offense. Like, between everything he could do with the ball in his hands in space, you line him up outside. Penn State did a couple of plays where they handed the ball off to KJ Hamler. Like, give me a triple option where it's Singleton, Pribula, and then KJ Hamler's the pitch man, and I would pay an obscene amount of money to watch somebody try to cover that. So Jahan's a great one. I thought a lot about Chris Godwin for this one too, potentially, but I think Trey Wallace can be a Chris Godwin-esque player. I don't think there are too many guys who can do what KJ Hamler can do, especially with that kind of speed. And again, with what AK could have done, I think would have been fascinating.
Yeah, KJ would have just been such a fun weapon in this offense. Like, to me, I'm taking the more practical answer in Jahan. But if I am going off of who do I think would be the most enjoyable to watch in this offense, it is easily KJ Hamler.
Parker Washington was also up there for me as well, because he's
Yeah.
one of my favorite receivers of all time to ever come out of Penn State. Again, a dude built like a running back who plays receiver is just super cool to me. And Bill, it was fun to go down memory lane there for a second, but there's another way that you can go down memory lane, and that's through your apparel via vintage collegiate logos, which can be found on shirts, hats, hoodies, crew necks, sweatpants. They're dropping corduroy hats very soon, which I know Nick is very excited about, from our friends at Home Field Apparel. Home Field has been our podcast sponsor since we have gone podcast only, and both Bill and I have been fans of them well before that. Like I said, they make some of the coolest collegiate apparel in the marketplace today, and they don't just have Penn State gear. They have pretty much every college under the sun, and they are always adding more. Our listeners can get 15% off their first order with promo code RLR24. I know the holidays are coming up. If you want to get the Penn State fan, or really any college fan in your life, something that they're really going to appreciate, Home Field Apparel is probably going to have something for them. So again, our listeners can get 15% off their first order with promo code RLR24. Thank you to Home Field for sponsoring this podcast. And Bill, there's a lot more here in this mailbag.
Let's dive into it then.
So this comes from our friends over at the Inside the Pylon podcast. Shout out to those guys. Be sure to check them out on your podcast platform of choice. Bill, they ask, any concern about the Penn State pass rush?
A little bit. And it's a difficult question to answer in that you consider who the defensive ends are. One is Denai Dennis Sutton, a guy who is new to playing this much football, is getting used to being a full-time player at the position, is getting used to everything that comes with that. And I expect as the year goes on, he will get more and more up to speed. The other starter is Abdul Carter, who is not a defensive end, who was not a defensive end until a couple of months ago. And he is in the process of getting up to speed. And I think he will do better as the year goes on. And then guys like Amin Vanover and Smith Vilbert are guys who have played some football over the years. And I say over the years because it's been forever since Smith Vilbert has been able to play football.
Yeah.
But they are continuing to build and build and build. You know, it's not like last year where the two starters were Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac, two guys who were carryover starters from the previous year or played a carryover starter level of a role and played a ton of, but they're two guys who played a ton of football, were used to being on the field all the time. And there is the added thing here of the two offensive lines that they have gone up against so far. One is an excellent G5 offensive line, and obviously you still expect them to be able to impose themselves, but that mixed with the speed that Bowling Green was getting the ball out is, that is going to mean that Penn State is not going to be able to get home all that often or very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then West Virginia just has one of the best lines in all of college football, which means it's going to be really hard to get home very quickly. So you put those two things together, and I do think as the year goes on, listen, Penn State goes out and gets 8 sacks against Kent State, and nobody is talking about this.
Correct.
Nobody is worried about Penn State's pass rush. So I'll give them a little bit of time on this. Having said that, the standard is so high at the position that I do wish they were a little bit farther ahead, but I kind of expected some growing pains with this group.
Mm-hmm.
We are going through those bowling grain, not bowling grains. That's not a thing. Growing pains. I remember what English is now.
Bowling grains.
Ask me. Yes, that's right. If that makes sense to any of you, God bless you. My real answer will be ask me again at, Kent State, Illinois, UCLA, at USC. I think after we get through that stretch, it'll be a question that we can answer with a lot more clarity.
I'm not concerned. I'm disappointed. I think it might be a better way for me to look at this. I understand that, West Virginia and Bowling Green especially, the scheme was built to not let the Penn State pass rush cause, their havoc. But at the same time, this is the Penn State defensive line. Like, figure it out. Get home. do it more. If they even are at 4 right now, I feel a lot better. Like, you think back to Purdue 2022, Penn State, I don't believe had any sacks in that game, because I don't think that final play by Chop Robinson counted as a sack, because the quarterback at the time got it off. So I think they had no sacks in that game, and they still hit that 40 sack benchmark on the season. So I think that they're gonna be fine, but at the same time, like, they're gonna run into a lot of talented offensive linemen in this league. So they just need to simply figure out a way to get home with more regularity. I understand the scheme neutralized a lot of it, but again, Bill, you made a great point. They could realistically go out there and get 8 sacks against Kent State, and the numbers look way more juiced. And does that really fix anything or really, ease any of our concerns? Probably not. But again, I don't think concern is the best word here just yet. It's more so disappointment for me.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we expected. I think we expected coming into the season a 5-star on one side and a guy projected in the top 10 of the NFL draft on the other side. We just kind of expected them to be able to gin this up without understanding that there are going to be major growing pains for them. And it's one of those things that it's going to be something that we pay, not we, like every Penn State fan, every college football fan is going to pay attention to over the next however many games. But I don't think we can give a straight answer yet. Got to play better if they're able. We want to see them get home more, but it's not something that I think is there's a clear answer just yet.
Yeah. And these next 2 questions, I'll lump these in together as well, because they're kind of similar and they kind of keep us in this same lane. From PSU fan 4814, should Abdul Carter give up 11 to Tony Rojas, since it has always been associated with LBs? And then Kyle asks, Abdul back to LB? I do not think Abdul Carter should give up number 11. I think if he wants to wear it as a pass rusher, totally fine. He was a linebacker for most of his Penn State career. I'm fine with it. In terms of if he's going to go back to LB, until everybody's fully healthy, I think he's going to play a bit of a hybrid role. But again, Abdul Carter's best asset as a linebacker was getting after the quarterback. I get he hasn't really produced those gaudy sack numbers just yet. It's 2 games against a run-heavy West Virginia and a Bowling Green team that wanted to get the ball out quick. Talk to me after UCLA on where I want this one to fall. Where are you on this, Bill?
On the number thing, one, do we even know if Tony Rojas wants it yet?
True.
But
13's a cool linebacker number, though, I will say.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I'm fine. I don't have a strong feeling either way on this. On the second part of the question about Abdul back to linebacker, I think that comes with the implication that they were never, ever, ever going to play Abdul Carter at linebacker this season. And, maybe they never were. Maybe that was never going to be their plan. Maybe they wanted to keep him at defensive end all year, but, their hand gets a little bit forced and they got to put him back there. I also think it's very plausible that they would have wanted him to just play some linebacker in moments this year. There would have been moments where putting him there and then going with Amin Vanover and Nittany and then having that little extra bit of havoc coming from up the middle of the Penn State defense would have also been a preferable outcome.
That would have been
Having
cool.
said that, yeah, and maybe the fact that the linebacker depth is a concern means their hand is forced and they can't pick and choose as much. Who knows? But I trust that they just know how to use Abdul Carter. They know where to put him. And I still, he hasn't had a sack through 2 games, but I don't I'm not terrible. I don't think it's terrible or anything like that with him specifically. He's going through something new. He's learning something new. I think he'll be fine.
I don't think we've seen the last Abdul Carter linebacker rep. I don't think Abdul Carter can be described as a Penn State linebacker, I think is how we'll leave this one.
Sure.
Bill, this one comes from not me, but the guy's Twitter name was me. This one's from me. Who would you most want to lose the first ever home college football playoff game, and why is it Notre Dame? For me, it's not Notre Dame. For me, it is an SEC team welcoming a Big Ten team to their stadium. I think that would be the funniest outcome, because it's pretty funny right now that Cal is riding the high of a win on the Plains at Auburn. The Cal memes on Twitter have been phenomenal. So like, give me like eventually like a Wisconsin going into Baton Rouge and getting a win at LSU in December, and then I think that's going to be really funny.
There are two very easy answers to this for me. One, Notre Dame is like, I don't think they're making the playoff, so I'm just going to ignore them altogether. There are two answers to this. One is Michigan, because I want nothing but the worst.
Oh, that's
I want nothing but the
one.
worst for that program. I want all their Big Four accounting firm as students to have to sit there and tell themselves it's not that bad that they lost because they just won a national championship. A Mickey Mouse national championship they had to cheat to get. But then the obvious answer for me is Clemson, and I need it to happen in a very specific way, which is after they got their asses kicked by Georgia, because they just don't have the guys that a program like Georgia has. I want them to go through the Mickey Mouse ACC. I want them to finish the season 12-1 and ACC champions in a conference that isn't very good. And I want everyone to suddenly be talking about them being a team that got past their early season issues, blah, blah, blah. I want Dabo to go up on, I want Dabo to be at his podium and say, the original person who was in the transfer portal was Saul when he was on the road to Damascus, or whatever the hell he would say. And I then want them to play an Ole Miss team that brought in a ton of kids in the portal, or a Miami team that brought in a ton of kids in the portal. And I want them to get run off of the field by a team that is built up by portal people, because there are a few things I find funnier than when everyone decides that it's time to just dunk on Dabo Swinney.
That's a good one. The problem is the ACC champ won't host a home playoff game. That's the only thing there. So give me them going like 10-2 with Miami winning that ACC, and then that Ole Miss scenario happening. I think that would be very funny.
Yeah, I regrettably, I hate to say this, but when you remove yourselves from your Penn State fandom, the answer is probably Penn State.
It is pretty funny. It would be pretty funny.
Listen, it would object for all the talk about how James Franklin can't win the big game. It would be very funny if Penn State lost to Ohio State, didn't make the Big Ten championship game, hosted a playoff game, and then lost. If I am removing my Penn State-ness from this, that would be the funniest outcome. I forget who had the tweet, but someone in the offseason had the tweet that said James Franklin's destiny is to be the first coach to lose a home playoff game. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ.
I think that was Kirshner.
Yeah. It might have been Alex.
Yeah.
So separating myself from it, that's the answer. Mm-hmm. At the same time, when I then inject myself into it, I would be really unhappy.
Vibes are bad thinking about that, Bill. So our next question is a infinite vibe lifter for both you and me. This is from Frank Leolia. I'm sorry, Frank. I don't know how to say your last name. Do you think there's a chance that Springsteen performs the entire Greetings from Asbury Park album on Sunday? First things first, this is one of the greatest albums ever written. Springsteen was like 23 when he dropped this, and Blinded by the Light is an unbelievable opening song to that album. And those are my thoughts.
So obviously what Frank is mentioning is the fact that I'm going to be spending my my first bye weekend seeing Bruce Springsteen in Asbury Park, New Jersey, which I'm beyond excited about.
That'd be awesome.
I don't think... it's funny. I had never seen Bruce in my life until earlier this year.
He's great.
And now I'm going to... he's... The live show is as good as everyone says it is. I don't think he's going to play all of Greetings from Asbury Park, because the thing with the tour that Bruce has been on over the last, basically 2 years now is actually some people have actually gotten pretty upset with him. Some of the people who follow him around, because Bruce is obviously getting a little bit older. So he's doing a set list every night instead of being more improvisational, which is, a kind of feature of Bruce Springsteen's music. So my guess is he's not going to play the entire album. Having said that, I do fully expect him to play 4th of July, Asbury Park, Sandy. And when he does that, I'm going to lose my mind, because, Madame Marie's is right over there. And what a bad person she is.
I saw him at Wrigley last summer. Unreal, dude. Like the vibes
Yeah.
had never been higher. What a great show. If you can see Springsteen live, I could not recommend it anymore, dude. He was great.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that he's going to be turning 75 in 2 weeks and he's still like
killing it.
Just such an unbelievable performer. Like I don't know how much longer we're going to have Bruce doing live shows, but make it a point to see it if you can. And on the off chance any of you are going to be in Asbury Park, New Jersey this weekend seeing him, like say what's up. I'll be the guy who looks like me.
To close this out, Bill, and thank you so much to everybody who submitted a question. We really appreciate it. This one comes from Ed Helinsky. It's a great one, I think, to end on. Good or bad? What surprised you so far about this year's Penn State team? Bill, give me one good or one bad, or I'm also happy to go first.
You go first because I need a second to chew over this one.
So I have a bad one, and it's one that no one's talking about, or at least I don't think anybody cares enough about yet. Gabe Nwosu's kickoffs are bad. Like, kicking the ball out of bounds, bad. The not getting touchbacks every time, bad. That's not been good. That is something that is not talked about nearly enough, and I am terrified that Zachariah Branch in the USC special teams unit is going to be able to take one back. So that's a bad thing that I'm really keeping my eye on. A good thing is, like, Drew's got that dog to him now. Like, this team, I think, between that, and this is going to sound so lame, Sander Sahadak posting the "I think I got my swagger back" meme on his Insta after this past week's game has me think this team is exercising some demons, and the vibes don't seem to be dropping despite the scare against Bowling Green. Like, I just think the mentality of this team is different than what we've seen, and I think Drew is going to play himself into an NFL contract this year. I honestly believe that. I think he's been phenomenal so far. So, vibe down, kickoff specialist, vibe up. Drew and just the general team seems like they're ready to play with the swagger they just couldn't play with last year.
Yeah, I think those are good answers. I will say, I'm going through it right now. Nwosu's opening kickoff was a touchback. Second kickoff was a touchback. Third kickoff was a touchback. Fourth kickoff was a touchback. I don't remember what happened with his one at the end of the first half, but that was not listed as a touchback. First one in the second half went for 62 yards and no gain. And then obviously the one at the end of the game went for 64 yards and went out of bounds. So was moving in the right direction after a rough start against West Virginia. I do understand that. I would say these are two things that are kind of related to one another. One is Drew and the confidence that he is playing with. You touched on it. I mean, he's looked like, the guy who is talking shit the way that Drew is looks so far removed from the guy who we saw last year, the scared puppy that we saw last year, who it was all new to him. You have him talking after the season about how he just has to build his confidence up. And he goes out there and he looks like a very confident guy. He looks like a guy who has that belief in himself that I think is really impressive. And the fact that he looks so drastically different from last year is great. And kind of tied into that is Nick Singleton and how I expected him to have a good start to the year. I didn't expect him to have the start to the year that he has had, where he is, 17th nationally in rushing yards through 2 games, averaging 9 yards per rush, which, is a pretty good ranking among guys who just haven't, who aren't like the number one guy, which is a wide receiver for Texas, who took a single run 55 yards and therefore is averaging 55 yards per carry. I would say just the two of them and how they are two guys who are playing with the confidence and hit the ground right. The level to which both of them hit the ground running is a pleasant surprise for me. And it's a very welcome thing in my eyes.
Ours in the top 10 real quick, Bill, in yards per attempt right now, dude. Like, he is pushing the ball downfield. Like, This isn't like the Bo Nix Mickey Mouse thing where he's completing 75% of his passes, but they're all 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Like, Drew is pushing the ball downfield, taking chances, throwing to the middle of the field. Like, this is a different cat this year.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the fact that we are seeing him play like that is just so optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
Like it makes me so optimistic about what he could end up being for the rest of the season and going forward. So shout out to him. Negative, I would say that the tackles are on offense are works in progress, which we knew.
Mm-hmm.
It was something we knew coming into the season. So I'm not like super devastated by it. Yeah, I would say the combination of Drew Shelton, of Nolan Rucci, of Anthony Donko, the three of them just have to get up to speed. They have to get used to being college football players. And again, there's this period where they have a little bit of time to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Drew's only been sacked twice. The running game's been working well. So credit to them. I just want to see them be a little bit more dominant.
Yeah.
Going forward. I don't mean to sound like Shaquille O'Neal talking about any center in the NBA, but I just want to see them be a little bit more dominant, a little bit start to take steps forward and start to become really rock solid bookends to a good interior offensive line after the first couple of games and bye week of the season.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think the tackles have been bad, but compared to like that interior of the offensive line, I think there's a clear difference in the level that they're playing at. So I get what you're saying there. It's more or less get up to speed with everybody else, more so than it's like, hey, you guys are playing poorly. So I get that. Bill, you want to talk Big Ten quickly at the end of this thing here? We got a couple of interesting-ish games. The Apple Cup, the Civil War, Wisconsin, Alabama. Not doing anything for you. UCLA, Indiana. Not doing anything for you. Maryland, Virginia.
No.
Yeah.
Look, let me pull up the Big Ten schedule.
I can give it to you right now. The morning slate: Alabama at Wisconsin, Arkansas State at Michigan, Central Michigan at Illinois. Anything interest you there?
I want to see Alabama got off to a really slow start for about 2.5 quarters last week against USF. Then they were able to kind of pick things up a little bit. So I think Wisconsin basically has to be ready from the rip for an Alabama team that is just miles better than anyone they've played this year. They started against Western Michigan and South Dakota and only won both of those games by 2 scores. Luke Fickell's one of the coaches who, he's not on the hot seat or anything like that, but he's in this period of trying to reshape Wisconsin football, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And I think getting run out of the building by Alabama might lead to, again, he's not getting fired this year, might not be getting fired next year, but would just lead to a couple people going like, what's going on? Like, what's up with the Luke Fickell experiment here? Is what he's trying to do by moving us away from what Wisconsin football has been forever? Is that a bad thing? And then Michigan, after what happened last week where they just weren't particularly good against Texas, Arkansas State isn't like a team of world beaters or anything like that. But, we saw with Penn State, we saw with Oregon, we saw to a different extent Notre Dame. You fall asleep in one of these games and it could, all of a sudden you're in a dogfight. So I want to see if Michigan's able to come out right away and, inject a little bit of life into a team that looked pretty bad last week.
The afternoon slate, Bill, consists of Prairie View A&M going to the undefeated Michigan State Spartans, Washington State at Washington, Oregon at Oregon State, Notre Dame at Purdue, and Troy at Iowa. Any of those interest you? For me, it's probably Notre Dame going to Purdue.
I'm interested in both of the ex-Pac-12 rivalry games. One, because they're rivalry games, and 2, this is the first, Washington won't get it the same way because that's a home game, but like Oregon has to go to Oregon State after abandoning the Pac-12 and causing it to fall apart. So with how unconvincing Oregon has looked to start this season, having
That'd
to
be
go
so
to
funny if Oregon State won that game.
that level of a hornet's nest is going to be like, ooh, boy, this is going to be interesting.
And then the nightcap, Bill, which doesn't really feature too many interesting games. I'm going to say one thing here.
Nothing in this nightcap is interesting. Nothing in this.
The Fighting Hoosiers get to go to the Rose Bowl, so it finally happened. So shout out to Indiana playing UCLA. And Bill, Eastern Illinois goes to the Lakeside Stadium in Evanston to play Northwestern. I might go to that game.
You should go to that game.
Check out that stadium. And tickets are probably cheap. I might go to that.
Well, because all of a sudden, like, you really only have another game or two before it starts to become like a destination. Like right now, the cheapest ticket you can get is $38.
It's not bad.
So it's not bad, but also that's more than you should be paying for an Eastern Illinois versus a 1-1 Northwestern game. So I would recommend going to that before college football people start talking about it too much, and all of a sudden, like, Chicagoans who want to feel something after the White Sox season and ahead of the Bulls season start buying up tickets for that.
1-0 Chicago Bears. 82 degrees though on Saturday. I might check that out. That might be fun. Bill, anything else you want to touch on before we send the folks off into their weekend?
No, nothing. Nothing really. Glad we were able to do something to kind of fill the gap this week, and I'm excited. We're all going to take a couple of days off now because there's just not going to be a game to recap. Mm-hmm. The next week we'll be back to talk about Penn State taking on Kent State.
Nick's filling in for me next week. I'm out of pocket.
Who?
Nick, allegedly, this guy who also is on this podcast. Nick will be back next week. I'm on the road going to Big Ten country. I'm going to LA for a couple days next week.
And you telling me that actually reminds me that I'm going to be sick next week. So
Nick's got a 3-hour solo show to make up for it.
He owes us that.
That's true.
He owes us that.
That's true. He does. Well, thank you so much for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. If you like what you heard, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, jump in the comments and talk about Penn State with other Penn State fans. Thank you, as always, to Home Field Apparel, I'm sorry, for sponsoring this podcast. Again, it's promo code RLR24 for 15% off your first order. Be sure to give us a follow over there on Twitter. We're at RLRblog. College Football Saturday, you can guarantee either Bill or myself will be tweeting something dumb from the account. And I'm really looking forward to this bye week, enjoying the time off. If you're going somewhere fun, travel safe. And for my co-host, Bill DeFilippo, I'm Matt Lubovitz. Take care, everyone, and go State.